It's a real pleasure to be here with closing our series on Mexican Indology with Wendy Phillips Rodriguez, a scholar from UNAM. It's really a great pleasure to have you here. And I would like to start, giving the floor to the ambassador. Thanks for being here today with us. His Excellency Federico Salas, please.
Thank you, Oscar. Of course, I want to start my my brief intervention by reiterating my gratitude to the Cervantes Institute here in India, and particularly to you, Oscar, for organizing and being so enthusiastic about this series of presentations of Mexican Indology. I think that these sessions have introduced us to the world of Mexican studies on India. And as I said in the first session, this topic had not been presented before, despite the prominent position of Mexican academics and researchers, the Mexican Indologists in the area of Indology in the Spanish-speaking countries, and the world of Indology in general. Now we are here, unfortunately, in this last session, and I am pleased to meet and present Dr. Wendy Phillips, a young Mexican Indologist of the new generation, who specializes in Sanskrit epics, comparative literature, and textual criticism. Dr. Phillips not only has an impressive curriculum in terms of her academic studies, but also her works on India that I am confident continue to enrich the existing studies in Mexico in Indology. I would like to thank everyone that has joined us today and in the past sessions. And I hope that this cycle inspires all of you to find new aspects of learning and delve into undiscovered areas of research, and that it paves the way for a more trans-border conversations like this about a culture that is as extensive and diverse as it is ancient. So thank you very much, and all the best for this session. And thank you very much again, Wendy, for being here with us.
Thanks, Ambassador. As you know, I am myself personally, a big admirer of Mexican Indology. I think you have a wonderful tool for cultural diplomacy using the Indological scholars of Mexico in India, because I think really Mexico is at the head, of Indological studies in the Spanish-speaking world. And I'm really very grateful to have you here. As you know, this session is being recorded, so you will be able to recover it and to use for any purpose that you may desire in the future. Well, let me start with a formal introduction of our speaker, Wendy Phillips Rodriguez. She gave a talk a long time ago at the Cervantes in 2012, and I hope we'll talk about that. But I would like to say that she is presently an associate professor in Sanskrit at the Classics Department of the Institute of Philological Research at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM. She holds a BA honors in Spanish language and literature from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, the UNAM, with a dissertation on religious eroticism and in the mystical poetry of Spain and India. Later, he did his M.Lit in Sanskrit Studies at the School of Asian Studies, University of Edinburgh, with a dissertation on a literary approach to Rama's character. And further, she did her PhD in Sanskrit in the Faculty of Oriental Studies, University of Cambridge, with a dissertation on electronic techniques for the analysis and edition of ancient texts and exploration of the phylogeny of the Dyuta Parvan in the Mahabharata. I would like to say that she began teaching at Cambridge in 2005, and after and her teaching was in Sanskrit grammar and translation, and later on she became a lecturer at the Faculty of Philosophy and Literature at the UNAM, beginning in 2008 to date. I would like to say and use a piece of text that she herself has written in her presentation, say that she is very interested in such a thing as textual criticism. And I know that he has contributed to very technical aspects of the edition of the Mahabharata. And I hope we will talk about that. But she says about herself that the key term that guides her research is cultural transmission. And that besides working with Sanskrit texts, he's been also keen on understanding other forms of cultural evolution, such as script evolution. And also the evolution of human movement, which has resulted in some collaboration with Indian classical dance artists. And also she's very interested in another topic, which is the migration of tales from India to other cultures. And she has to say something about how the Indian Panchatantra traveled to Europe, especially via Spain. She says that all these explorations have provided her with material for a work titled A Biological Metaphor of Culture, in which she is currently working. She has a good number of articles, and she has also a special interest in mysticism, especially in the feminine voice in mysticism. I will just like to read the titles of some of her articles, and I will do that, some of them in Spanish. One is Dos Chacales Indios en la España Medieval. Another very interesting one is about la necesidad de contaminarse, and I hope she will explain what that means. Then she has a series of articles on textual transmission in the Mahabharata, which is the topic of her thesis. And as I say, it's very technical and she's very innovative in that contribution. And she has also quite a number of articles regarding mysticism and poetic language. I read some of the titles, which are very suggestive. Tras de un amoroso lance, la avisárica náica de la poesía sánscrita y la voz femenina en San Juan de la Cruz. She has also written about la cuentística de Narayan y el realismo mágico, del sonido al trazo breve introducción a la escritura india, imágenes de la no dualidad en el canto del niño de las 8 jorobas, and also about la Bhagavad Gita, la luz de la crítica textual, and I think that the show will be interesting, la ideología social en Rulfo y Gandhi. Latitudes opuestas, pensamientos paralelos. Anyway, I just wanted to give you a taste of the kind of article and the multiple interests, that inform the work of Wendy. Thanks, Wendy, very much for being here with us today. It's really a joy for me to have you here. And let's begin our conversation, perhaps with the beginnings. It's a question that I put to all the Sanskritists, Mexican Sanskritists. Why this interest in Sanskrit? What did prompt you to study Indology? And what were the reasons and sources of inspiration for you?
Thank you, Oscar. This is really a wonderful opportunity to be here having a conversation with you. I also thank His Excellency Federico Salas for joining us in this, and to everyone in India or in Mexico and any place in between. Thanks for taking time for joining us. And I have always been a book person. I'm a reader, basically. I was a single child, and both my parents worked. So I used to spend a lot of time on my own. And I remember the time when my dad, I was about 5 or 6, I was complaining, Dad, I'm always alone, nobody plays with me. And he said, Wendy, you should learn to read. Once you learn to read, you will never be alone. And I think that was a very important phrase, something I really took as an important part of my life. So I became a reader. And I used to read everything. I just liked literature in general. And I was a student of Spanish literature at the UNAM, at the National University of Mexico, when I met this very particular professor. Dr. Juan Miguel de Mora. I think I was about 17 and he must have been maybe 70. And he was like a character in some movie. Like he knew so many things about not only India, but about the world. It seemed to me he was like a wise person for a very young girl like I was. And he was teaching Sanskrit literature. So I wanted to learn more. I realized that at that time there was very little to read in Spanish about the Sanskrit literature or Indian culture as a whole. So I was very curious. I wanted to learn more. So very little was available. So I thought I could maybe do a little thing there. And that's how I started. Basically, I started translating and learning Sanskrit because I wanted to read Sanskrit. It was not available to me. So I wanted to make it available.
Well, I'm very happy to know, you still belong a generation which perhaps is no longer there, and I myself included, that we were so bored when we were childs, when we were children, that we just took to reading, in Spain, that was very common, nothing to do but reading. And great people and writers began like that, I think that's no longer the case in the modern world. There are so many entertainments, but I'm glad to know that. And actually you took up my second question before being able to frame it, in the sense that and I'm very happy that you mentioned the Mexican Indologist Juan Miguel de Mora, who died a few years ago at the age of 90 something. Because I do really think, and I take the advantage of having here, the ambassador and the cultural attaché of the embassy, because I think one day we should do something about Juan Miguel de Mora, calling his Indian friends and doing an homage to him, because here in India, I think will be the best place in remembering. I didn't know that he was your source of inspiration, but I can understand how you were fascinated at that young age, to take Sanskrit as your main subject, because you have this profile that you started with Spanish literature, with Spanish, and then you went into Sanskrit, which I think makes it a very interesting combination. So let's go ahead. Where did you learn Sanskrit, and who were your teachers besides Juan Miguel de Mora?
Well, in Mexico at that time, and still now, it is not possible to do a BA in Sanskrit. That doesn't happen. One may learn some Sanskrit here and there in some cultural institutes, maybe a private teacher, if one gets lucky to find one. And but it's not possible to do a first degree in Sanskrit or Indian culture. So I did my first degree in Spanish, and I loved it. I often say my heart belongs to Indian literature, but my soul belongs to Spanish literature. So, or literature in Spanish, meaning also the Latin American literature. So the first time I could actually start learning Sanskrit was as a master's student. So I went to the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, where I was working with Dr. John Brockington, who is a specialist in the Ramayana. And that was a wonderful thing. Like, I always say that I have gotten many gifts from doing Sanskrit. The first one, of course, is the access to the text.
How many years did you spend in Edinburgh?
2 years. And the other gift are the teachers. So I came from Juan Miguel de Mora, who is the first Juan, to John Brockington, who is the second Juan, or John, which is the English for Juan. So I came to John Brockington, and he really had a difficult task in making me understand and teaching what is ancient literature, because I was coming from a modern literature background, medieval and modern, but it really took me a while to understand how ancient literature works and how it's more a collective construct than an individual enterprise. And he also introduced me to the critical edition of the Ramayana, which of course at first I was not loving it at all.
The Baroda one.
Exactly, because I was there because I wanted to read the Ramayana. I like narrative, I wanted to read it. And suddenly I was given these huge volumes with this bit of text and this bit of footnotes, and I had to keep shifting from the narrative to the history of the text. And I was not liking it at all at the beginning. I was thinking, why should I do this? I just want to read the Ramayana and know what is there in the Ramayana. But he was very good and very patient at letting me know that it was very important to understand the history of the text. So sometimes I had to read, these articles that say, oh, the word, this word appears how many times in this chapter, and this verbal form appears this many times in the other chapter. And I was thinking, my God, why should I do that? Like, what is that going to help me? But it did. At the end, it did. So I became aware of the history of the text and how the text itself carries its own history and story. So I was very impressed at the end of my master, which was it was a difficult time because I knew no Sanskrit, so I had to learn from the start. I was dealing with a critical edition that was a bit too much for me at times, but at the end, the footnotes that I was hating became the thing I wanted to work on. And that's how I moved to my PhD.
And just a side question, how good is the critical edition of the Ramayana? According to your opinion, because I know there is a lot of polemics about the Mahabharata in the critical edition. What about the Ramayana? What you will say about that edition?
I will say I have a very particular opinion about critical editions in general, and in particular the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. I think they are good. I think they are as good as they can get. I mean, editions are like humans. They can have many virtues, but they will have also defects. So as long as they are aware of the defects they have, they are totally fine. The problem is if they sell themselves as being perfect. So it's like humans, I think.
Okay. And one more question, because we know the importance of oral tradition in India. But I think, and correct me if I am wrong, no, we know that the Vedas are still being transmitted orally, and even today in today India, and I saw that myself when I was in Banaras, and people that had some friends in Banaras whose mission was to learn portions of the Vedas. But I think that's not the case for the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Those are written transmissions, right?
Well, I wouldn't know. What I'm certain about is that the transmission of the Vedas and the transmission of the epics has been very different because of the purpose of the text and the use of the text and the history of reception of the text. So they are not comparable. I don't know, in epic studies, I don't know, people fight about was the epic literature started as with an oral tradition and became written, and some scholars actually say that they believe that it started as a written work and then it moved to the oral world.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
That's amazing. To me, it's a little bit difficult to believe, but we have no evidence not to prove one theory nor the other, so it's open to debate still.
So let's move forward, and I was, really impressed because you did your PhD in the University of Cambridge, and you got this Dike Award, what outstanding doctoral thesis on